Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of AI News, Drama, and Updates. We are now in the second week of May. It's hard to believe we're almost halfway through the year at this point. And it looks like Google just had their I.O. this week, so a lot to cover in that space, but a lot of other fun stories as well. So let's go ahead and get started. It looks like just using the tools of ChatGPT, somebody challenged themselves to recreate the game of Beat Saber. And they were pleasantly surprised to find out that GPT-4 was able to guide them through creating VR tools, creating all of the individual scripts, and basically showing them how to go through this whole thing step by step. I think it's really surprising for a lot of people to see how much obscure knowledge that ChatGPT or GPT technology actually contains. And I think you really have to consider where a lot of this training material comes from because tools like GPT can actually scrape through entire gigantic manuals and process just the information that you need to answer the question that's in front of you at that moment. And when it comes to programming, oftentimes that's kind of what you're dealing with is one problem at a time until you've completed all of the problems. And eventually you end up with something that works and does what you want it to do. While some people might take a look at the fact that it took 3 days to complete a project like this as a bad thing, there's other people who have been playing video games, loving video games, and feel like they're sitting on the sidelines because they've got some great video game ideas. And for someone like that, this might be an inspiration. Imagine getting your game off the ground, and it's never been more possible than it is today. So, food for thought. Now, I suppose I'll give Meta some credit for not giving up on something that they've been trying for a while to get off the ground with their virtual reality stuff. Through the process, I mean, whether it's on purpose or even by accident, they've created some amazing technologies like Llama and even like the segmentation model that we took a look at recently. So I'll talk briefly about Imagebind. I don't know a ton about it just yet. This is the first I've heard about it, but this looks like yet another technology that tries to interpret the world as humans see it so that we can work with that data. In terms of Meta, it looks like they're trying to use it for the world of VR and three-dimensional environments, which makes perfect sense for them and for the future of AI technology, really. But in a lot of cases with Meta and some of the projects they've had in the past, in a how it started versus how it's going type of scenario, the reason I really wanted to cover this is because I'm very curious what the open source world is going to do with it. Maybe not so much Meta. We've already seen a couple of times recently where people have taken the torch from Meta and really run with it and created entirely new things. So this article does do a little bit of guesswork as to what the future could look like with this type of technology. And it talks about VR, mixed reality, and the metaverse. Says imagine a future headset that can construct fully realized 3D scenes with sound, movement, etc., everything on the fly. And even though a lot of these tools really do focus on your senses, like your sight and sound, there's going to be accessibility options that begin to present themselves for people that don't have that type of advantage in the real world. So tools like this, maybe not necessarily at first, but eventually tools like this and technology like this can eventually start to close that gap and help to eventually put everyone on the same playing field. But to sum it up, it looks like Meta is trying to look beyond the senses that we normally think about when we try to interpret visual cues and things like that. They're trying to make different types of connections to see if it creates a better model or a more efficient model. But the thing I will continue to commend Meta for is they are releasing everything right into the open source world. You can see here the repository is already on GitHub from just 2 or 3 days ago. At this point, people are already able to work with it, improve it, and start to make tweaks to make it even better. So we'll wait and see what happens to it, even starting next week. You saw what this community did to Llama in just a couple of weeks, so sky's the limit. We'll have to see what happens. But speaking about large language models, speaking about GPT, we're hearing more and more, and every week it seems like I have to counter another story about job losses and greed-based layoffs that they're just simply blaming in the world of AI. So I did think it would be interesting to show that there is a study here that shows that GPT adoption may actually reduce turnover and improve job performance. This was reported by NPR, but it was an MIT and Stanford research study, and it looks like this study is centered around tech support agents mostly. But the level of job satisfaction, the level of ease, not only was it a more pleasant experience for a customer, but it was also a more pleasant experience for the employee themselves. It does look like there were some individuals who had an advanced skill set who didn't find the chatbot as useful. But overall, what they found with this study is that this reduced turnover and it improved the customer experience. Now, don't get me wrong, there's going to be massive changes to the economy as a result of machine learning, as a result of artificial intelligence and AI really just taking off. But even as somebody who's trying to cover this stuff from week to week and staying up to date on this stuff, I have seen companies lay people off and then turn around and blame AI, but I haven't seen them actually replace those jobs with AI employees, so to speak. All right, so quick overview on what a black box is, because I think it freaks people out unnecessarily. So I'll nutshell this the best way that I can for you. We put together a series of steps. That series of steps is called an algorithm. And an algorithm results in output given input. So hopefully all that made sense. Now, if you can picture that same thing, but the algorithm can actually learn along the way, it'll determine whether or not it was successful or not. It'll determine how efficient it was, and it can slightly adjust things to make it potentially have a different outcome. And for the most part, that level of intelligence is what we're seeing with AI. It's just slight adjustments to those numerical formulas. At the most basic levels of what machine learning is, the black box is essentially that large chart of data, which to us would probably look kind of nonsensical. It's just going to be a bunch of numbers. And when they talk about the black box of a model, what they're talking about are all of those connections made within the model, those data points that basically tell the model what is right and what's wrong. But it's based on its own learning and its own process. So I say all that to say that the black box is not a magical thing that we don't understand. I think that's the impression that a lot of people would like to leave you with, is that AI is mystical or magical. We've designed the black box. We designed it to exist, and we understand why it exists. That's not the part of it that they don't understand. To help you really think about and understand a black box, you really need to think about how complex a model is. It's a big web of different words. So if there's a million different words in there, let's start with a few. If we had one word here, and then another word here, and another word here, there's going to be different connections that the model makes between each of those words. And then there's going to be, cross connections where they crisscross each other. And based on the training, based on what a model goes through, whether you're training it on words or whether you're training it on images, there's going to be numerical values that are assigned to these connections. The strength of those connections is determined by the training. And so when we talk about the black box, we're talking about looking at this data and trying to look at it with our human mind and understand what that means. And of course, that's hard to do. We're not going to be able to make sense out of it like that. So yeah, they had GPT-4 take a look at some of the output that GPT-2 had to see if GPT-4 could actually make more sense out of it than a human person could. And apparently doing this job against a human who knows what they're doing, there's not much of a difference right now. But one of the interesting things that did come out is that alien concepts can actually emerge within the models. Training words that don't actually exist within human language, for example, but the model somehow makes connections for. The same thing can happen within images. The more they can focus on this and understanding how that black box eventually emerges, how they can work to create it in a different way, or how they can better understand it, is just going to result in better models. And of course, the better GPT can start to understand itself, the more that we can build off of that knowledge, the better the chances we're going to see AGI sooner than later. When we're talking about large language models, we have mentioned in the past how important context is. Context is really everything for these models. Going off the top of my head, I remember GPT-3, I think, was about 3 pages of data. GPT-4 can hold up to 10 pages of data, is what I reported. Well, Anthropic's Claude, which I haven't talked a lot about if I'm being honest, Claude can actually hold up to 100,000 tokens now. It can read an entire book and spit out analysis based on that book. This isn't just a RAM upgrade. This is a 10-fold increase in the amount of contextual data that this thing can interpret. For those who aren't familiar, tokens are closer to syllables than they are words. So we're not talking about 100,000 words, but this is still about 75,000 words. And just to be very blunt, with that much context, you're probably not going to be able to tell that this is an AI. This is probably going to be indistinguishable from a human if you're just talking to it via chat or something along those lines. Now, one of the issues that still exists with Claude, it looks like they're still treating every piece of information as equally important. So you can imagine over the context of 100,000 tokens, that is a bigger and more pervasive problem than it would be in a short sentence. But nonetheless, this did get my attention, so I might have to take a deeper look at Claude now. This was probably one of the biggest and most important IOs for Google, I would imagine, with everything they've been going through against Bing, everything they've been up against with ChatGPT. They got terrible press from their CEO paying himself an exorbitant amount while laying people off. They got terrible press from rushing Bard out. So I think for a lot of people, they were looking at this as maybe Google's opportunity to bounce back. And I'll say we had some phone stuff, we had a lot of Android-related stuff, but the Palm 2 AI model upgrade to Bard was probably one of the bigger announcements that they made. Now, comparatively, and you've seen it here, Bard has been garbage compared to GPT. It's been routinely unhelpful and incorrect. So the idea that the base model, the brain behind Bard, was completely overhauled and upgraded, that was amazing. Unfortunately, when I went to test it myself, though, and this was after the announcement that the model had been upgraded, my tests didn't really go all that well. What I found here as an example, when I asked about Edgar Allan Poe, when I spelled it correctly, I got a response of, as an AI language model, I'm not able to assist with that, which, by the way, that doesn't even make sense. Anyway, the other response that I got was when I misspelled the middle name, I got the full response. I actually got cited sources. And had this been the original response, I would have been impressed. But because it wasn't, I'm not. And so, yeah, there is the message here. Bard may display inaccurate or offensive information. It is experimental, yada, yada, yada. But based on what I'm seeing, it's just still not ready yet. So put that Bard back in the oven. But, as I say that, I also want to announce that they brought to the table that they're immediately putting this tech into Google Docs, into a lot of their Google Office applications. And they may actually even beat Microsoft to the punch with that. And if I'm being honest, if Google's technology had the coherency of GPT-4, this would be show-stopping. This would be amazing. I just don't know that Bard is there yet. I don't know that I would trust it with relevant data, especially if it's like small business data or something important. Can I trust Bard to handle payroll? I think it's incredibly important that we know when we ask Bard a question that we're getting the right response before we start integrating it into our business communications and our spreadsheets and things like that. But to each their own. There was another AI announcement from the I/O where Android Studio is getting a Copilot competitor. So those of you who are programming for Android devices are able to get a tool, a bot that actually helps you code, just like Copilot, or even some of the other options that we've been seeing coming out recently. Reminder for last week's video, we had Hugging Face's Big Code. A couple weeks before that, Amazon had something of their own. So in the AI/ML coding world, the competition appears to be heating up. Now, this may not be as exciting because I just got finished trashing it, but you have access to Bard now if you didn't have it before. So go ahead and give it a shot and see for yourself what you think. One thing I did want to show you is, while it may not necessarily be in there today, you're going to start to see multimodal support very, very soon. This actually might be a big deal for Google and a big deal for Adobe. This is Adobe's Firefly. This is their copyright-free image model, and it's going to be integrated directly into Bard. It's going to be integrated directly into a lot of Google features and Google documents, Google applications. And very similar to how Bing is going to be using DALL-E to generate images, Google is now going to be using, surprisingly, Firefly to generate images. Now, I say surprisingly because they have image generators of their own. I'm very curious why they would go this direction versus something like ImGen, other than the fact that this is a copyright-free model. So it seems that that may be the possible reason as to why they chose this model versus the one that they've been working on for years. Or, somebody wrote a big check. That could happen too. It's possible my Poe question really just confused the Bard bot, but I do agree that I do think Palm 2 is an upgrade, and I do think that Bard bot is going to get better in time. It's just my concern, like I've said before, is I don't know if it's too little too late. And it does seem like a lot of the integration of these AI systems is really just trying to keep up, and they feel like desperate moves. I want to see one of these systems really do well. If any of their integrations, like Bard being added into Gmail, really take off, users are going to love that. And Google could really use that right now. They could really use good user press. But mark my words, you're going to start to see the Google page itself change too, and regular search is going to start to become more of a generative search if you aren't seeing that already. And one last thing that I want to say about Google before I close my Google I/O topic is that Google has also opened up access to a text-to-music AI. And just to give you an idea of how AI has changed company policies, how AI has already changed the world, I mean, just in January, Google was saying that it had no plans to release this. I mean, the article talks directly about it. The company says it doesn't have any plans to offer public access due to ethical concerns related to copyrighted material. And really just the landscape surrounding copyrighted material has shifted. And so we're not even 6 months later, and Google has completely reversed that policy, and they're like, here you go. This is yet another example of how I feel like the copyright laws are going to be changing, and they're probably going to be changing drastically, but this isn't necessarily the video for that, so let's just go ahead and move on. Because in the same vein, Spotify has ejected thousands of AI songs. So yeah, we saw AI Drake in The Weeknd pop off. We heard Grimes say basically, hey, go ahead and use my voice, you guys, and split the profits with me. But even with all that going on, it looks like Spotify is just getting rid of AI-generated songs. Not at the behest of artists as much as the behest of the Universal Music Group. And look at that, no surprise here, this is a music industry power broker named Lucian Grange. He spent the last few months speaking out against this. And you can see his quote here, the explosive development, left unchecked, it'll increase unwanted content on platforms. And really, I think unwanted is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, because given the fact that the Drake and Weeknd video was viral, for example, and I don't know that it was Drake or The Weeknd that wanted to take it down, I don't know how unwanted that is, aside from the people that are industry power brokers. I could see people like this as not wanting competition or not wanting their profits to be cut into. But yeah, I don't think copyright law is coming to save you, Lucian. And I feel like we can only hope that we're finally seeing the end of crypto bros and crypto mining. But luckily, those crypto mining operations, those gigantic GPU-based systems, are not without purpose. It looks like they can be repurposed into AI farms for the new modern world. AI can be a lot more powerful and a lot more useful than crypto ever was for the real world. So yeah, there's some rooms full of these GPUs where unfortunately it's just a bunch of e-waste now. But in certain cases, there's going to be certain crypto miners that are able to use this tech and the type of video cards that they had to maybe turn it into something that might benefit people. One thing I'm pretty sure that we're not going to see, though, is big companies taking advantage of smaller groups and organizations like this. You're probably going to see those companies making use of large services like AWS or Azure or any of those nationwide type networks that are just going to have the dependability that they'll need to run enterprise level services. And I had a little news story out of China for you. The first arrest in a GPT-4 related crime. From what I read about here, a man in China used a GPT news story to fabricate or elaborate on a story about a crashed train. I guess it didn't happen. And when you lie like that in China, you get yourself arrested. So I guess this story is less about AI and more about how serious China takes misinformation, but it sounds like pretty seriously. But at the same time, China is also having its own Drake AI music moment right now with a singer known as Stephanie Sun. Stephanie Sun's songs, which are Mandarin pop music songs, are now topping the charts as AI-generated songs are just ripping and running. I'm very curious how countries like China are going to handle the copyright issues and things like that, but based on how they're handling this particular situation, it seems like they're just asking that things are labeled as AI. They're not arresting anyone over this, and they're certainly not shutting it down like we're doing here. So yeah, AI is going to create a litany of different copyright and capitalism related issues, and it's going to be very interesting to see how one country versus the next will handle each of the issues in kind. So I'll end today's video by talking about the CMA, which is the Competition and Markets Authority in the UK. They're a group that is trying to do some regulation work. I guess they got in the way of Microsoft combining with Activision recently, and and the irony of people who are operating under a kingdom, like a monarchy, who are talking about fairness and talking about governance and things along those lines, the irony doesn't escape me there. But we've actually already seen a number of articles like this, and nothing really concrete has come out of these as of yet, and I guess if that situation changes, I'll let you know here. But yeah, I think that covers the headlines I cared most about this week. In the next few days, I'm probably going to have another ControlNet video coming out, so make sure to hit that subscription and notification bell if you want to be notified of when that comes out. But if I don't see you there, I'll probably see you next week for another episode of AI News, Drama, and Updates. Thank you for your likes and interactions to the channel, and as always, thanks for watching.